Abraham Lincoln discussed the massive human suffering caused by the 4 years of Civil War during his second inaugural address. He asks whether all this bloodshed is worth it to end the Southern states' determined efforts to maintain slavery. He answers, "Yet, if God wills that the Civil War continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still must it be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." Lincoln is connecting two dimensions of time together. He relates the destruction and bloodshed of the past 4 years to the suffering of the past 250 years of American slavery. He is relating the immediate suffering, death, and destruction to the unimaginable and continuous suffering caused by slavery. He is prompting the audience to view the present within the broader timeline of slavery. Lincoln is demonstrating a powerful usage of time. How we perceive the present is determined by how we relate to the past. This relation determines our moral frame of reference. This is similar to the last line of Moby Dick. As the ship Pequod is sinking, Melville writes, "The bird went down with his ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell till she had dragged a living part of heaven along with her, and helmeted herself with it. Now small fowls flew screaming over the yet yawning gulf. A sullen white surf beat against the steep sides, then all collapsed, and the great shroud of the sea rolled on as it rolled on 5,000 years ago." Melville, like Lincoln, relates the sinking of the Pequod to divine justice. Evil cannot be defeated without dragging a part of good into hell with it. Just as with Lincoln, our life and our individuality are shrunken down compared to the eternal timelines, which encompass thousands of years. No matter what, the great shroud of the sea remains unchanging and will endure. Melville and Lincoln show how powerful time can be as a relativizing force. Time can also be understood in how we relate to our ancestry. This is treated in The View from an Attic Window by Howard Nemeroff. The author enters his family attic and feels the weight and presence of his countless deceased ancestors. "I cried because life is hopeless and beautiful, and like a child I cried myself to sleep. High in the head of the house, feeling the whole, beneath me pitch and roll among the steep mountains and valleys of the many years that brought me to tears." Nemeroff in this poem is describing how the passage of time feels, and he compares it to standing on top of a hull of mountains and valleys. Nemeroff is capturing another dimension of time, both being something beautiful and complex, but also something that entraps you. Time can also be felt as the contrast between the realm of past hope and the grim reality of the present. In W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk, the chapter titled Of the Meaning of Progress discusses Du Bois' experience teaching in a small town in Mississippi. He describes his students, the school building, the small town, and the joy of teaching. But when he returns years later to the building, he finds the ruins of his school and the continued state of poverty of many of his former students and their families. He concludes, "My log schoolhouse was gone, and in its place stood progress, and progress, I understand, is necessarily ugly. My journey was done, and behind me lay hill and dale, and life and death. How shall man measure progress there where the dark-faced Josie lies? How many heartfuls of sorrow shall balance a bushel of wheat? How hard a thing is life to the lowly, and yet how human and real! And all this life and love and strife and failure, is it the twilight of a nightfall, or the flush of some faint dawning day?" Thus sadly musing, I rode to Nashville in the Jim Crow car. Du Bois is examining the hopes and dreams of the past and their failure to come to fruition. This failure is represented through the ruined schoolhouse. Joe Davidson notes that the schoolhouse represents a dialectic of hope and disappointment. The contrast between the hopes and dreams one strove for in a past day and the brutal, poverty-stricken, racist realities of the present is a profound and saddening feeling. Davidson does note that Du Bois considers this disappointed nostalgic feeling as progress, as the original hope and dream is still present in Dubois. Dubois is showing that as long as the dream is still present within us, progress is still possible. What these passages capture is the complex relationship humans have with time. Time is not simply a mathematical measuring tool. Time is a powerful force that motivates almost every action we take, whether it comes to relating our lives to grander godly timelines or being late to the bus, taking risks on new experiences because you only live once, or worrying about death or our ancestry. All of us are trapped, motivated, and profoundly affected by time. How can historians incorporate these complex temporal dimensions in their research? Lynn Hunt examines this question and begins by acknowledging the impossibility of defining time. She writes that time feels like an essential and defining feature of human life. Yet, it is the dimension of our lives about which there is the greatest philosophical and cosmological disagreement. She outlines concepts and relates to how we measure centuries, such as fin de siècle, meaning the end of the century. How can historians accurately capture the feeling of complex temporal feelings such as fin de siècle? This feeling is inseparable from the culture and context of the time, and it is important to ask how a historian can bridge the gap between themselves and their object of research. Some historians have paid special interest to time as their object of research. Reinhard Koselleck invents two new terms to describe how we as a society experience time. The space of experience is what is remembered, the past which has been incorporated into society's consciousness and can be recovered and used. Koselleck writes that experience is present past, whose events have been incorporated and can be remembered. Koselleck means that present past in the sense that it is the part of the past that can be drawn upon in the present. The horizon of expectation is described by Koselleck as the future made present. It directs itself to the not yet, to the non-experienced, to what which has to be revealed. Hope and fear, wishes and desires, cares and rational analysis, receptive display and curiosity, all enter into expectation and constitute it. Essentially, it is what one expects from the future. So this is a very complicated way of defining what we learned from the past and what we can expect from the future. So why is Koselleck interesting to study? Koselleck claims that for European thought, the French Revolution and the Enlightenment changed the way we think. He writes, "This historico-philosophical axiom, as a result of the Enlightenment and an echo from the French Revolution, provided the foundation for history in general as well as progress. Both are concepts which achieve their historico-philosophical plenitude only with their lexical formation. Both indicate the same substantive content. That is, no longer can expectation be satisfactorily deduced from previous experience." Essentially, before the Enlightenment, European philosophy was based on the foundation that what was happened before would repeat itself. But the Enlightenment and French Revolution changed this vision of time. Humanity was going towards something, progressing. This idea of progress gave the philosophical justification for the mass exploitation and colonization of the world by Europe, i.e. the civilizing mission. We saw in Lincoln and Melville this idea of repetition. What has happened will happen again. The Great Shroud of the Sea will continue as it did for thousands of years. And there is also a biblical passage that captures this idea quite well. This is from the book of Ecclesiastes 1. "What do people gain from all their labors, at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, 'Look, there is something new'? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them." As we can see from this Bible passage, time is something unchanging and continuous, a divine realm which humans have no effect on. Koselleck is claiming that the Enlightenment changed this European thinking about time. Humans are now agents of time and forces of progress, or regress. Koselleck cites thinkers like Adam Smith and Leibniz, who all conceive of humanity as gradually developing in reason and progressing naturally towards a better society. Koselleck also relates this changing interpretation of time and progression to the technological developments of the 19th century in transportation, sanitation, communication, etc. He writes, "From the late 18th century, another finding joins the one we have just discussed, that of techno-industrial progress, which has an impact, albeit a variant impact, upon everyone. It has become a general empirical principle of scientific invention and its industrial application that they gave rise to an expectation of progress that could not be calculated in advance." Koselleck is an example of a major historian trying to study how we relate to time, albeit in a very European context. Given the diverse and constantly changing interpretations of time, even shown within this short video, how should a historian capture these interpretations in their research? In general, the historian lacks the extensive cultural and contextual knowledge that can only be fully gained by living in the period of study. Literature can enhance the historian's understanding. It increases empathy and gives meaning to the study of the past. So, can literature be used as a source? Horn and Ritter outline how historically traditionally treated politics, the evolution of institutions, the role of political personalities, and the narration of discrete events. This narrow interest made historians primarily engaged in the collection and organization of facts. Given this traditional standpoint, is it possible to expand the scope of facts and use a novel as a source? Can generalizations be derived from a single author's perspective? The discipline of history does give precedence to using literature as a source to derive meaning from the past in the following three ways. Firstly, the fact/non-fact and the story/history dichotomy is increasingly being questioned by historians and philosophers of history. Hermann Paul, in Key Issues in Historical Theory, discusses this topic in depth. He outlines the debate surrounding how truth as a concept is evolving past being a dichotomy between being based on a solid rock of indisputable facts or having no base whatsoever. Paul outlines how historical theorists such as Kukaken consider historical works to have degrees of objectivity and subjectivity. The relationship between narrative and historical writing is not completely distinct. Hermann Paul outlines Hayden White's theory on historical writing. White considers historians to implot their narratives into 4 archetypical story forms, further thinning the wall between history and story. Paul writes that the relationship between experience and story is more complicated than we might think. Furthermore, Reinhard Bernbeck discusses the relationship between stories, narratives, and archaeology and the past. He outlines how standard so-called scientific sources are profoundly shaped by political circumstances, just like novels, making it harder to claim the total supremacy of standard sources over narrative and fiction. Secondly, bias in the preservation and conservation of what we consider standard sources is significant. States and institutions are what preserve sources. The preservation is a political choice. Most of what is preserved is record-keeping for state function. This can be a major problem when studying the history of colonialism, for instance. Let's take an example: the extreme repression at the hands of the French army and police after the Sétif and Guelma massacre in 1945. This repression made historical accounts surrounding the 1945 massacres heavily biased towards a French perspective. French Algeria structurally and institutionally repressed Algerians, especially after 1945. This repressive regime makes the full scale and breadth of colonial atrocities difficult to account for. Media censorship was very common, even in newspapers in the French metropole, such as L'Humanité. Jean-Pierre Peyeroulou writes that French censorship prevented the development of a public debate on the massacres. Given this repression, accurately depicting the Sétif massacres can be a challenge. Sarah Maza outlines how throughout the late 20th century, many scholars insisted on telling history from below, to incorporate the narratives and stories of disenfranchised groups. Given the intense repression and the lack of Algerian witnesses of the 1945 massacres, because the French army killed them, literature from Algerian writers can serve as a tool to write a more complete history of the 1945 massacres. Finally, subfields of history such as microhistory also allow historians to derive historical meaning from the lives of an individual or a single event. Maza describes Carlo Ginzburg's work, The Cheese and the Worms, which chronicles the ideas and life of a single 16th century cheesemonger named Minocchio. She claims that this work suggested that you could derive historical significance from studying the life of a single obscure individual. In this sense, if historical meaning can be derived from the unique life of an individual, could this not also be applied to the unique perspective of a literary author? Overall, this video has made a small outline of the various interpretations and feelings time can give, and proposed a way to capture these feelings in historical research by incorporating literature in historical writing. Thank you for watching.